Despite the scale of the story, the Lord of the Rings is remarkably watertight when it comes to plot holes. There's the matter of the eagles, which has been answered 1,000 times, and there's some minor unanswered questions, but overall, there's nothing really that tears the entire story apart. However, there is one sort of plot hole that, while not actually in the Lord of the Rings, does take place during the story. And interestingly enough, this is a plot hole that Tolkien acknowledged and sort of just went, how strange. In this video, we look at the Witch King and the Shire plot hole. Okay, so a few years before the War of the Ring, Gollum wanders into Mordor and is captured by Sauron's forces. Gollum is tortured and reveals that his precious, the One Ring, has been taken by Baggins, who comes from the Shire. For Sauron, this news is monumental. As far as he was aware, the One Ring was still lost in the Anduin, somewhere around the Gladden Fields, where Isildur had been killed thousands of years earlier. Unfortunately, Sauron's elation quickly turns to terror. He releases Gollum, hoping that the creature will lead him to the Shire, but instead, Gollum is captured by Aragorn and taken to the Elves of Mirkwood. Sauron is worried that Gollum will reveal to the elves the same information that he had just learned. Sauron's biggest fear in regards to the One Ring is that someone will use it against him, so if the elves got their hands on it first, that could be a disaster. So Sauron gathers the Nazgul and decides to send them to hunt for the One Ring, armed with the knowledge of the Shire and Baggins. He wants this to be a stealth mission, so on the 20th of June 3018 he launches an attack on Osgiliath to help the Nazgul get across the river unnoticed. On the same day, he launches an attack on Frantwyl in Mirkwood with the idea of killing or recapturing Gollum. At first, everything goes great for Sauron. His forces seize the eastern half of Osgiliath and the Nazgul manage to get across the river. In the north, the attack on Frantwyl also finds some success. While Sauron's forces are unable to get to Gollum, the creature does escape into chaos and eventually ends up hiding in Moria. But that's where the success stops. For the better part of 3 months, the Nazgul are unsuccessful in finding the Shire. They travel up and down the Vales of Anduin, where they assume the Shire to be, and return to Sauron's messengers empty-handed. Sauron is angry at this failure, but he puts them on another lead, Saruman, who might know where the Shire is because he's been caught deliberately misdirecting Sauron's servants before. On the 20th of September, the Nazgul reach Isengard, and the primary version of the story has Saruman also managing to misdirect the Witch King, but Saruman's gambit fails quickly because shortly afterwards the Nazgul run into Grima Wormtongue, who is returning from Edoras, and he is all too happy to point them in the direction of the Shire. Having what they need, the Nazgul go full steam ahead towards the Shire, and 4 of the Nazgul enter at dawn on the 23rd. Frodo, Sam and Pippin end up leaving Bag End around the same time Cumul reaches Hobbiton, and fortunately for Frodo, Cumul is unknowingly misdirected by the old gaffer, who assumed that Frodo had already left for Crickhollow that morning. But here's the thing. The Nazgul spent 3 months unsuccessfully searching for the Shire because they didn't know where it was. At first glance, this makes sense. The Shire is over 1,000 miles away from Mordor in a remote place that hasn't been relevant for over 1,000 years. Even the men of Gondor and Rohan aren't exactly aware of the Shire. But there's one problem. The Witch King should have known where the Shire was because he was actually fairly familiar with Eriador. You see, from 1300 to 1975 of the Third Age, the Witch King was the King of Angmar, a land in the northeastern corner of Eriador. From his seat at Carndoom, the Witch King had waged war against all of Eriador for centuries, which was mostly controlled by Arnor at this point. In 1974, the Witch King finally defeated Arthedain, the final remaining Arnorian successor state, and he triumphantly took up his seat in Fornos, the fallen capital. The following year, a coalition consisting of Gondor, the Elves, and the survivors of Arnor was successful in defeating the Witch King and driving him from the north. The Witch King was in the north when the Shire was founded. In 1601, the brothers Marco and Blanco were given permission to settle the now deserted lands in central Arthedain by King Argaleb II. This was the creation of the Shire, and within 30 years, all of the hobbits who were dwelling in Eriador migrated there, except for a few in Breeland. So for 374 years of the Witch King's reign in Angmar, the Shire did exist, and what's more, they are recorded to have fought in the final war against Angmar. According to their own records, the hobbits sent brave soldiers to defend Fornost, of which none returned, and again to retake Fornost after Gondor arrived. We're also told that during Angmar's final conquest of Arthedain, the Shire was actually swept over by war and most of the hobbits fled into hiding, which might imply it was even conquered by Angmar. However, given it survived, the occupation could not have been too brutal or lasted all that long. Yet even though the Shire was around during the Witch King's wars, and even though his forces did conquer the Shire briefly, the Witch King clearly had no idea where the Shire was. What makes this more strange is that during the hunt for the ring, the Witch King still knew Eriador well enough to make some logical decisions. For example, he knows the location of Bree and correctly guesses that the ring bearer will pass through there on their way to Rivendell, so he keeps a watch on the town and the road and also makes it more difficult to get there by going to the Barrow Downs and awakening the Barrow-wights. Tolkien actually acknowledges this confusing conundrum in the Unfinished Tales. Since the Black Captain knew so much, it is perhaps strange that he had so little idea of where the Shire, the land of the Halflings, lay. According to the Tale of Years, there were already hobbits settled in Bree at the beginning of the 14th century of the Third Age, when the Witch King came north to Angmar. So yeah, even Tolkien is saying that the Witch King should have known where the Shire was, given he was in the north when the Shire first came to be. If the Witch King knew where the Shire was, which he probably should have, a lot would have changed. For example, when Gollum revealed the name Shire, the Witch King could have immediately said that he knows where the Shire is, and the Nazgul could have left for the Shire years earlier. There would have been no need to release Gollum with the idea of hoping that he would lead them to the Shire. This could have meant that, depending on when they left, the Nazgul could have reached the Shire well before Frodo was even aware that Bilbo's ring was the One Ring. In this case, the Nazgul arrive, take the ring, and Middle-earth is doomed. The fact that Tolkien sort of just shrugged and said, yeah, it's kind of strange that the Witch King didn't know where the Shire was, is kind of a nonchalant response to what could be seen as a major plot hole. This might mean that Tolkien didn't really see this as a plot hole and instead saw the Witch King's lack of knowledge about the Shire as explainable. He never gave this explanation himself, so it's up to us to guess. And honestly, this is really hard to explain because I don't think there's any overly legitimate reasons as to why the Witch King didn't know about the Shire. Obviously, an answer like he forgot is nonsense, because the Witch King remembered Bree and the Barrow Downs, and just because he was a 5,000-year-old wraith, I don't think he was suffering from memory loss. That leaves us with the answer, the Witch King never learned about the Shire, or in other words, he was focused on capturing Fornost and the rest of Arthedain didn't matter to him. But this would be really odd for an experienced military campaigner like the Witch King. If you're planning on conquering a kingdom, you want all the information you can possibly get your hands on. You would have spies in their lands and detailed maps. On top of this, the Witch King's forces seemingly overran the Shire, so unless the Witch King didn't give that order, that's just more reason for him to have known about the place. And if the Shire truly did send troops to two separate battles, surely the Witch King would have observed them on the battlefield. It genuinely feels like the only way the Witch King could have been ignorant about the Shire is if he was choosing to stay ignorant. This one is just really difficult to explain. In other videos on my channel, I haven't pulled punches when it comes to the Witch King. I've said that his pride and his occasional cowardice led to multiple disasters for himself and Sauron, but he also had numerous successes, major successes, to the point where calling him an idiot would be completely unjustified. And in this case, I feel like only an idiot could not have known about the Shire. Anyway, let me know what you think. Do you have an explanation? Do you think it's a plot hole? Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. If you have suggestions for videos about other potential plot holes, please let me know. Maybe I could start a Middle-earth plot hole series, the beginning of my villain arc where I gradually come to realize that Tolkien was actually bad at writing and Middle-earth doesn't make any sense or something. Cheers, farewell, and remember, maybe the Shire had a different name back in the day, which is why the Witch King didn't know about it. Maybe it was called the County or the Borough or something.